Previously on Star Wars Factions. An attack on the planet of Umbara was unleashed by the clones in response to the Umbaran population pledging allegiance to the Empire in an act of sympathy after Thrawn's successful scheme. The initial attack, led by Commander Bly, was a success. Count Dooku, who was part of the Separatist faction, came up with an idea to unleash a pirate wars along trade and supply routes. He urged Jango Fett to create armies large enough in order to pose a threat against the other pirate groups. Steps, amongst others, to make this happen were the Coruscant bank heist and the skirmish on Felucia, where Veers unfolded Dooku's scheme. In response to the knowledge given by Veers, the Republic agreed to attack Utapau, that was recently invaded by the droids, to put pressure on Dooku's army as retaliation for the pirate wars. The assault was led by the Jedi General Qui-Gon Jinn, and though the attack on the Outer Ring was victorious, they needed access to the lower levels to fully liberate the area. A squad commander by the name of Rain was sent out with his engineers to manually override the system controls to open a way up, when they found themselves cornered by droids. In a final moment, the clone engineer Rox, who was notorious for reprogramming droids to fight alongside him, came to their rescue. On Umbara, the clone troopers were on the move. The previously Umbaran-held outpost had turned into Central HQ by Commander Bly. As he had his troops move into position to take on a recently built Imperial armory, he called Rex by his side as he had a special task for him and his 501st. Nearby mines and cave systems held Umbaran supplies and reinforcements. Though not assumed a big threat, they could utilize the locations as a sneaky setup point to prepare a counterattack or flanking attempt. Rex was ordered to divide his team and hit the mines to make sure the surrounding area was secure. As it was very unlikely that the caves would be big enough to hold vehicles, infantry would be enough. Rex swiftly agreed and headed back to his post to prepare his men for the mission. The first group he would send out to one of the caves consisted of Dogma, Hardcase, Tup, Jesse, and Kix. Rex repeated Bly's words and told them just to focus on clearing out the caves. If they spotted any useful supplies, they were ordered to leave them there until it could be retrieved by a relieving party. Expected resistance were more Umbaran infantry with a possibility of Imperial troops as well. Dogma, the most serious of the troopers, took it upon himself to function as squadron leader as they headed out. Rex started to prepare a second group as his men left the base. But they had no idea what was waiting for them when they would arrive at the cave. On Utapau, the battle for the lower levels was still going on, as Rain and his men were able to send down more troops thanks to the rescue attempt by Engineer Rox. But Rain and his men's attitude towards Rox was anything but thankful. Instead of thanking him, Rain asked him what he was doing here. Rox answered that he was sent down here to see if he could reroute the system to open some of the passages leading to the lower platforms. Unfortunately, it was impossible to bypass, and just as Rox called in to report, he claimed he saw Rain and his crew head towards the platform guarded by the destroyer droids. Lethado asked if Rox was also responsible for the malfunctioning droidicas, therefore saving them a second time. Hostility could be felt in the tone of his voice. Even though these clones owed their lives to Rox, they still despised him due to the rumors surrounding him and the fact he turned battle droids into his allies. Rox did not answer directly, but instead was surprised to find out that Rain and the others did not destroy the droidicas back then. That gave Rox an idea, but he said he had no time to explain as he ran away towards the outer ring, leaving Rain, Lethado, and the others stupefied. As he ran away, he shouted that he programmed the battle droids to follow Rain's orders for the journey back to command. but Rain and everyone else agreed that they did not need the help of clankers. They cleared a path towards the platform themselves, meaning that the route back should be safe to travel. Rain approached the droid commander and told him specifically to stay put and don't follow them. The droid replied affirmatively, and Rain left, followed by its men. Above the planet, another battle was raging on. Venators and acclamators headed into position to attack a control center, as the CIS had unleashed the expected counterattack. Even though the attack was expected, the CIS still managed to get a jump on a part of the clone fleet due to communication centers positioned on some of the asteroids. The units that took the first hit of the counterforce suffered casualties, as multiple frigates and ships caught on fire as they got attacked by bombers. Hundreds of starfighters tried their best to keep the enemy off their main ships, but it was total chaos. One of the Venators was destroyed, its crew being torn apart as pieces of wreckage floated through the battlefield. The Vulture droids changed their targets to the smaller acclamators as the clone pilots did their best to counter their losses. The small fighters danced between the larger frigates, utilizing them as cover to lose those stalking them from behind. It proved difficult to get a lock on targets, as they often quickly disappeared underneath or in between larger ships. Another Venator was about to give, and more ships were sent into a defensive position as the fleet got word of having the control point located. The attacking fleet moved through constant enemy fire, as they slowly chipped away at their shields and hull. They were afraid that some of the smaller frigates would not make it in time to do at least some damage to the control point. But now finally the tables were turned, as the CIS had to start fighting defensively. The droids positioned near the Republic station still continued their barrage and succeeded in heavily damaging one side of the station. The clones rerouted most of their shields towards that one side, but it got shot too much and eventually gave way. Larger CIS ships had started to engage it as well, but luckily, at that point, they got word that the CIS control point shields were destroyed as well, and Republic bombers and fighters began their attack run in the narrow opening to destroy the unit from within. They succeeded with some well-aimed torpedoes, and took out the remaining CIS fleet, dominating the space above Utapau. Dooku's plan on unleashing a pirate wars had worked marvelously. Over the past few days, skirmishes and large-scale battles erupted among several supply lines used by various factions, crippling their supply runs and reinforcements. This hopefully would reveal a weak point to attack next, but it was still too early to know. The armies were often led by bounty hunters, Jango and Boba leading the side funded by Dooku and the Separatists. Forces sent by the Hutts and the Zan Consortium were amongst others who fought in these battles as well. The Separate War itself created a war economy for Dooku to build more powerful armies. The battles were often short-lived and chaotic. The men fighting usually used their own equipment, some armed to the teeth, whereas others entered the battle wearing only rags. Cases of friendly fire also often occurred, as the clashing forces did not wear army colors and the participating pirates were not trained marksmen. The equipment that was used was gathered, stolen, and bought on the black market specifically for these incidents. After the battles were over, the landscape was scattered with wreckage, weaponry, and dead pirates. Often, the winners salvaged their defeated enemies' weapons, gear, and still functioning vehicles to aid their own cause. Those who surrendered were often brought to their most forward operating base and were given a choice: either join them or die. A pirate's honor is not very much to speak of, and most of the time their life was worth more than their pride or the price they received from their previously aligned faction. But Jango, who did not fight at the front line himself, but pulled the strings from behind the scenes with his son, demanded the enemy officers to be treated differently. The highest ranking ones were to have their heads cut off and sent back towards their commander as a message. Tiber Zan knew all too well what this message was. It was meant as an insult, to enrage the army commander and lure him into a trap by making a move too rash or predictable. Zan knew this pirate wars and the blockades of the supply routes would be disastrous for him in the long run, and thus he had to come up with a different plan. A plan he had already worked out as he called for his trusted companion Silri. She was to arrange a meeting with General Grievous, as Zan assumed he would be more open to negotiations than Jango. He assured Silri that they would give them an offer he could not refuse, and one where Silri's own involvement would be most vital. Back on Umbara, Dogma and his squad had reached the cave's entrance and stumbled upon troopers they did not recognize. They were not sure if they would be hostile or not, but they certainly did not make a friendly impression. Hardcase asked if they should attack first to take advantage of the element of surprise. Then, one of the guards spotted the clones and opened fire, giving the 501st members a reason to fire back. The other guards seemed surprised by the sudden exchange, and some headed inside the cave, as the ones who stayed outside quickly got destroyed. Tup informed the others that he saw more troopers heading deeper into the cave. Dogma gave the order to approach carefully, as they would head in to clear the area out. On Utapau, Rain and his men were heading back as they made their way through piles of bodies and wrecks that were still burning. They had not encountered a single enemy until then, but suddenly their path was blocked by a swarm of battle droids that used one of the open doors to reach the outer ring from one of the lower levels. As the clones opened fire, Rain immediately ordered their retreat as they were no match for the overwhelming number. Before Lotharo had a chance to run, he was hit and fell to the ground. He was dead, and Rain and his remaining engineer Fetch would be too if they did not hurry up and fall back. Luck would have it that the swarm of droids heading to the upper level had been picked up by command, and the nearest squad of clones were sent in to hold them off. They would not be enough to win, but at least they could win some time. One of the clones reached out to Rain and said he was safe and advised him to head back to command the other way around. But Rain saw that the clones were already having trouble holding the line, and he decided to stay, to gradually fall back as a group and take as many clankers down as they could. Rain's decision to stay and fight alongside the clones boosted their morale somewhat, and Fetch was also fighting beside them. Rain ordered the men to move back little by little, but he felt that the droids put way more pressure on them with each passing second. Fetch shouted to Rain that they would not be able to hold much longer, and that their defense would be broken. Rain kept silent. He knew Fetch was right, as the droids had already gained more ground than before. Then suddenly the clones were stunted, as several battle droids passed them and started firing at the other droids. They were the battle droids belonging to Rox. The engineer himself also ran up to fight alongside the clones who looked like they could use his help. He asked Rain why he did not have the droids escort them. Though the helping droids would not have been enough to win the battle, at least they would have given them time enough to retreat back the other way. Fetch remarked that he would rather be eaten by a rancor than depending on the help of droids. Rox answered back that it seemed like they had little choice now. Sadness could be heard in the tremble of his voice. Rain snarked that the battle droids of Rox would not be enough to win this battle anyway, and Rox agreed. "That's why I made some new friends," Rox answered. Before Rain and Fetch could ask what he meant, they saw in the corner of their eyes 4 destroyer droids head through the clones and fire at the battle droids. "Are those the 4 droidicas we encountered earlier?" Fetch shouted. "Are you telling me you reprogrammed droidicas? Are you insane?" There was unbelief amongst the clones, but Rox felt proud. "First, I just deactivated the droidicas when you encountered them back then, but when you told me that you did not shoot them, it gave me an idea to add the destroyers to our army. The 4 destroyer droids were big enough to block the whole lane, and their shields protected them from any incoming fire. Their rapid shots shredded the enemy as they quickly lost numbers. Rox ordered his droids forward to take most of the damage as his fellow clones could retreat. He urged Rain to head back as he and the droids would hold them off. As Rox headed forward past the droids, Rain started to realize how much he actually owed to the engineer. But suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted as Rox was hit in the chest and fell to the ground screaming. He lay there, but his hand was still twitching. Rox was still alive, but barely hanging on. "We have to leave him," Fetch shouted. "It's too dangerous to get him back. Besides, he is a danger for the entire clone army with his droids." But Rain's despise for Rox had been melted away and replaced by guilt and a sense of gratitude towards the engineer. He owed Rox his life 3 times now, and he never asked anything back in return. He was a soldier that the Republic could be proud of, and one who would not be left behind. Without answering Fetch, Rain passed him and ran out in the open. Fetch watched him with an open mouth as Rain dodged incoming blaster fire as he picked up the wounded clone. "Cover me!" Rain screamed as he slowly walked back towards the clones with Rox on his back. The droids made way for Rain and Rox as they managed to both get out alive. Rain put Rox down and requested an escort as they started to head to command. The battle had sundered down. The 4 powerful droidicas had done so much damage to the battle droids that the ground was filled to the brink with droid parts. Some of the regular battle droids belonging to Rox stayed behind to cover the retreating clones. Back at command, Rox was immediately taken to the medical bay where he recovered slowly. When he could receive visitors, he was surprised to see Rain come visit him, as normally, no one cared about him. Rain apologized to Rox and said his eyes were open to the acts of kindness that Rox attempted to do. He realized that because of his interaction with the droids, Rox's voice often was not heard by the other clones, but Rain promised Rox that from now on, he would listen. He thanked the engineer for saving his life 3 times and said Rox had earned some rest. He ended his visit by offering Rox a position in his squad when he would recover. Rain realized no other squad leader would want to have Rox on their team, meaning it would be difficult for Rox to make a promotion. He did not say this out loud though. Rox stayed silent. Behind his helmet, tears were flowing down his cheeks, but he refrained from making a sound to hide this. Rain could tell though by his posture. Rox gladly accepted. Rain was pleased and tapped him on the shoulder. He ended his conversation telling Rox that his droids were welcome as well. On Umbara, the members of the 501st headed deeper and deeper into the cave. They encountered more resistance by the mysterious troopers, but the skills of the 501st members were way more superior. The enemy aiming skill were subpar, and their tactics seemed ancient. They were no match for Dogma, Jesse, and the others as they took out more sectors one by one. At a certain point, Dogma and his men came across a pile of dead Umbarans. The medic Kix investigated the bodies, but frowned upon the discovery these men were not killed by blaster fire nor melee combat. Who could have done this? Hardcase asked, but no one had an answer. The expression on their faces was that of pain. However they died, it must have been in agony. After turning a few more corners, the clones came out at a larger area where they were surprised to find a walker standing. It was an older model. They had never seen it in actual combat. Some of the men only recognized it from their teachings. The walker had not spotted them yet, and the clones argued what to do. They did not possess anti-armor weapons strong enough to deal with this. Top advised to call in Rex, and Dogma agreed. But just as he called in, Hardcase noticed that the cannons on the walker were moving. He yelled to run, and as the clones headed for cover, a barrage of rockets headed their way, creating a sea of fire. The destructive nature of the rockets fired resulted in part of the cave collapsing. Though this meant they were safe from the walker, it also meant that Kix and Tup were cut off from Dogma and the rest. Dogma shouted if they were still alive, and both answered affirmatively. The stones were too big to move by hand. There was no way they could go back the same way they came. Dogma said he would inform Rex on the situation. Something was not right here, and he would feel safer with reinforcements on the way. Tup informed Dogma on a tunnel entrance on their side. They would go in to check out if there was a way around the collapsed stones to reunite with Dogma and the team. Hardcase told them to be careful out there. Dogma managed to successfully make contact with the captain, and he explained the situation they were in. Rex had just sent in his second team and asked Dogma to describe the men they had encountered at the cave. When he heard the description, Rex held his breath for a while. Though Dogma and the others had no idea who these men were, Rex knew all too well. Rex caught Dogma off and ordered him to find a way out of the cave as fast as they could. He said to try and reach Tup and Kix to see if they could get out as well, instead of heading deeper into the cave. Rex would prepare a retrieval group to come and rescue them. As Kix and Tup tried to find their way through the dark caves, Dogma tried to reach them, but something was preventing him from making contact. After a while, the two separated clones stumbled on a large row of statues. They watched in awe at the stone-cloaked figure. "Who do you think that is?" Kix asked. Tup stayed silent for a while, and answered he had no idea, but it gave him shivers just looking at it. As Rex informed his men to prepare a large assault force to retrieve the clones, he was interrupted by a communications clone hurrying towards him. He informed Rex that unknown ships had been sighted in the sectors above Umbara. He said Command had no idea what was going on. Rex immediately requested to be taken to Commander Bly. Indeed, high above the planet, approaching ships were getting closer and closer to the clone fleet without establishing any form of communication. The control center of the clones was in total panic, as they had no clear reading on this incoming force, and no one knew what was going on. As Kix and Tub headed further, they stopped again as they saw a huge sprawling area in the cave. This was large enough to have multiple AT-ATs stacked on top of each other. But weirdly enough, there was nothing there but void and another feeling. A feeling that was cold and sinister. Without saying a word, both clones headed deeper into the cave, as their footsteps echoed throughout.